Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friends of the Force, a Star Wars podcast. I'm your host, Brad.
And I'm your host, Sarah.
And this week on the show, we are bringing you a live from Star Wars Celebration interview. We talked with author Adam Christopher, who just wrote the Del Rey novel Star Wars Shadow of the Sith, which is the latest adult novel, and it covers adventures with Luke and Lando, pits our heroes up against Ochi of Bestoon, which everybody doesn't like that guy. No one likes that guy. Ochi's kind of a punk, isn't he?
That's fair enough. That is fair enough.
He's a total punk. And it also takes us on an adventure with Rey and her parents, Dathan and Miramir. So there's a lot of stuff going into this book. It's a fascinating adventure, and we're so honored to have talked with Adam to discuss his first official Star Wars novel, which has been long in the making. And what a better place to do it than at Star Wars Celebration.
Absolutely. If you recognize Adam's name, he has also written short stories in both the A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, A Certain Point of View anthologies. He has also written tie-in novels for Stranger Things, Dishonored, Elementary, and Star Wars Adventure comics. He's also written the Rey Electromatic Mysteries, The Spider Wars, and From the Empire State. So many books.
Yes, definitely. So once again, we were so excited to talk with Adam. We get into his writing process for this book, how he approached legacy characters, as well as introducing new ones and establishing newer ones, as well as what he saw some of the challenges to this book as well. So there's a lot going into this thing, and it's a chunky book for sure, too. We just got our review copies, and it's a thick one. It might be the thickest Star Wars book I own. Would you agree with that?
No, it is not. It is Thrawn, Lesser Evil, or Greater Good, or whatever the last one is.
It's pretty close. It's a pretty close tie, but
it's like 65 pages.
Yes. So this will include some light spoilers as well. Some stuff that has been previously mentioned at panels. So if you want to be like completely spoiler averse, you might want to avoid this interview until you've read the book, but it's like, again, light on spoilers. So just fair warning before you get into it. But again, so excited. Without further ado, let's jump over to our interview with author Adam Christopher.
So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view.
A certain point of view?
Luke, you're going to find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view.
So we're here with Adam Christopher, who is the author of Shadow of the Sith, which is the newest book from Del Rey. Adam, thank you for joining the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. You're actually our first in-person interview. We're doing it at Celebration, which is exciting. So we're all back together and celebrating Star Wars. So first thing I want to ask is, how has your first celebration been so far?
Yeah, amazing, really. My first celebration ever, and it happens to be the one where I have a Star Wars book coming out, because we're recording this a month before the book's actually out, and it's kind of wild. It sounds strange when I say it out loud, but like, people recognize me and have been talking to me and stopping me, and which is great. Mm-hmm. It's great because I now know that people are actually interested in Star Wars, and it sounds kind of weird, but like, they're aware of not just the movies and the TV, but books and comics, and as like one part of one big storytelling mythos, because it's nice to have it in person. It's different, Twitter and Instagram and all that, it's quite easy because you get reactions. Mm-hmm. But to actually be out here and people coming up to me and saying, we're looking forward to your book, I'm like, wow, me? Really? Okay, cool. So yeah, it's been really good. Like, and this is day one, and I'm glad I'm here.
Yeah, we're definitely right there with you. What is your personal history as a Star Wars fan? When did you come into Star Wars, and what do you love most about it?
So I'm exactly the right age, I think, because I grew up in the 80s, like peak geek culture that we know of now. So it was Star Wars and Doctor Who, but also, I was a fan of G.I. Joe and Transformers and He-Man and all that stuff. Mask. I can actually legitimately say that the first movie I ever saw was a Star Wars. I've worked it out. I was August 1978. I was 6 months old, and my dad, who's my dad's a big science fiction fan, and he really wanted to see it. And this is 1978, and in those days with movies, especially in New Zealand where I'm from, it's like movies were released and re-released, and they went out and they came back in. So this is not the premiere year. So I can actually say properly, technically, that was my first movie. And I have to apologise always for anyone who was in the cinema in August 1978, because taking a 6-month-old to a movie is not a good idea. Yeah, it's like explosions and noise and things. Yeah, so I have no idea what he was thinking of, but anyway. But then
I'm glad he saw it too.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. And then from there, it was like I did see Return of the Jedi at the movies. With a friend of mine from school. I think Empire Strikes Back. It must have been VHS. I think probably, but I don't really remember. But I remember because my dad worked in advertising. So from New Zealand, he'd take a lot of business trips to China, Hong Kong, Japan, and bring back toys that you couldn't get in New Zealand. So my memory is like, him coming home and unpacking the suitcase, and it's like the AT-AT and the X-Wing Kenner toys and things. And also it meant that he, for his job, could borrow the company VHS machine, which are they were really expensive.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where every Friday he'd bring it home for the weekend, stopping off at the way home at the video rental store to get Empire Strikes Back. And I would watch it 12 times in the weekend, and then the tape would go back on Monday, and then we'd repeat the same thing again on the next weekend. I was kind of single-minded and probably a little bit obsessive, which is
that's the natural thing with Star Wars. It kind of just takes you in, and
and it's I say that like it's a bad thing, and then here we are at Celebration, and my book's coming out, and so. That's okay then. It was all right.
This is the place where all the obsessives are, and it's celebrated, and I think that's pretty magical about this convention in particular. There's so much great energy just around all of it, and because we all are spending perhaps a lot more time than maybe we should be,
Yeah. But having said that story, it's probably there's 1,000 people here with similar stories of growing up with Star Wars. For me, because I'm at that age, it was the original trilogy. But, so many people and friends I have, who discovered it through the prequels. You become really aware of the kind of generational thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting, I think, to see here in person again, especially after the Skywalker saga has concluded. Right. So now you have 3 full trilogies that people have really dove into, and you can see where everybody's kind of fandom comes from, and I think that's always a cool thing, because I'm somebody who is an adult now in the sequel trilogy age, but I was a kid in the prequel trilogy age, and so they both mean a lot to me, and it's cool to see them celebrated in such a way. But you mentioned, you're obviously a writer. You're here with the book coming out next month. Was writing Star Wars a dream of yours, or was that something that just kind of came to be as an adult? How did you become a writer, and how did storytelling in that way kind of come into your life?
I think I really have to thank Doctor Who for that, because my 2 fandoms, I kind of call them, would be Doctor Who and Star Wars, because, obsessively watching Empire Strikes Back every weekend at the same time as watching Doctor Who. And Doctor Who in particular has a very literary fandom, because we had the Target novelizations, which my school had, and in New Zealand at the time, this is mid-80s, so there was a big repeat season on TV of John Pertwee Doctor Who, so I was watching that and reading the Doctor Who books from the library, which meant whenever we did writing, I would write Doctor Who stories. And I kind of always, that was my thing. It's I wanted to write a Doctor Who story. So Star Wars, it kind of never occurred to me that you could write a Star Wars story, because of course the expanded universe came later, in the 90s with Heir to the Empire and onwards. At which point I had moved on a little bit, you know. Doctor Who always had this kind of continuation of, original fiction. So the first stuff that I had published was actually Doctor Who fan fiction. This isn't like ancient history because it's back in the days of print fanzines. Mm-hmm. So I had Doctor Who fan fiction, and also I was getting stuff published at high school, like in the yearbook and things, which kind of indicated to me that, other people wanted or were interested in reading what I wrote. So, yeah, I've always written and always thought that I would be a writer eventually. But Star Wars, I think it was actually probably the sequel trilogy, that first trailer with, the Chewie We're Home trailer. And I was like, okay, yeah.
Celebrations.
Oh, that would have been unbelievable. And I think that was the point. I was like, well, hang on a minute. I need to, I want to write a Star Wars book. Mm-hmm. I can't remember what year that was, 2014? Yeah. Well, it's 2014, it must have been, because my friend Chuck Wendig, who wrote the Aftermath trilogy, and Star Wars fan, obviously, and we have the same agent, and I remember the trailer, and I was talking to him, going, I'd love to do a Star Wars book. And he was like, well, you know what happened the other day, which is, because he got Aftermath. And I was really angry for I don't know, a day. And then I was like, okay, congratulations. But yeah, and then Star Wars is one of those things where, there's I write original fiction. They call it original fiction, which is my own stories and things. And then there's IP or tie-ins, which is like Star Wars or Doctor Who or Star Trek or whatever. And it's a very different kind of writing, which I really enjoy. And I think of that kind of tie-in writing, you don't get bigger than Star Wars. It's the top of the pile. So I was aware that it's difficult to get a Star Wars book. Because, there's actually not that many a year, if you break it down. The old days, there was lots. Because that was Star Wars. That was carrying the story. Mm-hmm. But now, obviously, it has to be more, I don't know, selective's not the right word, but it's more...
fitting into, the current canon and universe that they're trying to build,
Yeah, and a lot of people want to write a Star Wars book. But I just kept pestering them, really.
Yeah. It's wonderful because as a kid, like you're saying, you watch Star Wars and you're at such a young age, and then now you're contributing to that piece of the universe. But what I find interesting is you mentioned, that the sequel trilogy for you was something that was really, incredible to see that trailer and growing up with the original trilogy. And obviously Shadow of the Sith blends those two eras quite well in terms of, pulling from the sequel trilogy in terms of Rey's story, while also paying homage and continuing the adventures of Luke and Lando. So for you as a writer and as even a fan, how do you sort of find that balance between those two eras to sort of bring something that is familiar yet also expands the story in a new way?
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that really struck me about the book, was the things that I could do in terms of linking things together. Not just because you wanted to link, that will span that gap between Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens. This kind of, 35 years of hardly anything that we've got. But also as a fan, I'm always thinking of wouldn't it have been great if we saw live action Inquisitors, for example, or if this character met that character, because they all exist in the same universe. Mm-hmm. And the thing also about Star Wars is because we've been introduced to the saga out of order, kind of chronologically, and you have characters that appear, like Ahsoka, for example. Suddenly Darth Vader had this apprentice, or Anakin had an apprentice, who of course never existed for the original trilogy and things. So some way of blending all that together and making these connections to show that actually, well, if Star Wars is one cohesive universe, then of course this is all sequential. So for Shadow, I obviously, it's a Luke and Lando story, but the opportunity to take original trilogy characters and sequel trilogy characters and comics characters, or not characters more, but like we can talk about spoilers, can't we?
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. So so things like the Star Herald, the ship from the Tales from Wild Space. Not that I was having a laundry list of things like to tick off, but I was like, well, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this or this? So yeah, and as a Star Wars fan, that's like really quite a lot of fun. And especially because of the sequel trilogy, because in the book I have, it's kind of weird with the sequel trilogy because I'm tying into Rise of Skywalker, which is like the third of the trilogy. And in Rise of Skywalker, we learn about stuff that has happened before that we haven't seen. So I really wanted to use like a character like Pride, General Pride.
Yeah.
Because he appears in Rise of Skywalker. And I mean, it's Richard E. Grant, and he's awesome.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, like, where did he come from? He was behind the scenes somewhere throughout the first two in the sequel trilogy. So I was like, well, clearly I have to kind of use him in some way because he's got a whole story,
And you did nail the voice. Like I could totally, when I was reading every line delivery, it was like, that's Richard E. Grant. He could say that,
Man, those two chapters were so they wrote themselves. It was like I was like, okay, well he's and especially because this is the younger version of Pride.
Right.
The older Pride that we see is like arrogant, officious, refined and kind of pretentious. So if you kind of work backwards, especially because he obviously it's a fall from grace. Because if he was an officer in the Empire and then that all collapsed, and then but he's like, I'm imperial, I'm important. You can imagine what position he was in, however many years it is before we see him. So yeah, oh my God, he was so much fun. Just the voice of him, it's just like he hates. Yeah, he's like so annoyed and like so arrogant, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, Ochi's kind of the same way too. So it's fun to watch them kind of go against each other because you got two really arrogant, annoying kind of personalities clashing and seeing kind of how they butt heads and kind of one-upping each other.
Like now I think about I don't think they listen to when they meet twice.
Yeah.
And it's like I don't think they listen to what the other person said in either of those situations. But yeah, so like in terms of blending and linking stuff together, amazing. And I was lucky that I had kind of free reign to just do whatever I wanted.
Is the biggest barrier to doing something just am I going to ask whether I can do that?
I figured that I would not worry about that. And because obviously when you do things like this, there's a process that you follow, and before you even write the book, there's quite a lengthy outline, which is approved by all the people that needs to approve it. So I kind of made sure everything was in that, so I knew from the beginning if I could do something or not. But having said that, whenever you write a book, you do drift from the outline. I mean, with tie-in work, part of the job is you can't drift from the outline because that's approved, but you can still take tangents and things. So there was a few points where I was like, I wonder if I could do that, or maybe not. And I figured, well, put it in. They'll just say no if I can't.
Yes.
But I don't think there's anything. I was surprised in a way because, sometimes it's difficult, and the link to the Dark Legends characters. So I kind of Dark Legends by George Mann is supposed to be non-canonical, canon-adjacent fables type of thing. Yeah, and I was like, well, no, clearly Darth Noctis and Darth Sanguis were real people, so I put them in the book. It's and I thought surely they're just going to take them and say, no, you can't do that. But no, they let me.
I think that's the great part about those books is and it includes Legends of Luke Skywalker by Ken Liu. You're like, okay, well, this one definitely never happened, but this one we can maybe pull something from that, or you can say, yeah, no, that's definitely canon, in your own mind.
Yeah, and it's especially with Dark Legends, because obviously that particular story links directly to Exegol, but it's well, what if it did happen exactly as it is portrayed? What impact would that actually have if we discover that this is how it was? which again, like as a fan, is kind of fun, but also importantly, like any book like this, it's not just for fans. If someone just sees it in the bookstore and it's Star Wars and it's got Luke Skywalker in the front, they go, "Oh, I love Star Wars, Luke Skywalker." They can pick it up and read it and enjoy it, and not worry about any of the references or continuity or cross-referencing Dark Legends or the comics or whatever. Like it's its own thing.
Yeah.
But if you recognise those references, then do you get more out of it? Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned, Chuck Wendig and George Mann, and in your acknowledgments you mentioned Cavan and George and Kristen Baver, and like what sort of guidance or advice did they bestow upon you as you took on this project, and what does it feel like to join kind of this group of Star Wars authors this year?
Yeah, the thing about Star Wars authors is that we're already professional writers.
Yes.
So, which is kind of important because the people who are in charge of Star Wars are worrying about the TV and the movies and the important stuff and the books and comics. They're part of the story, but they're like, there's something that they can't worry about. So they need to find people that know what they're doing, and they can just say, write this book and then bring it back, which is fine because that's how it should be. So in terms of like me and George and Kevin and some of the others, it's like, it's less, it's almost say it's like a social thing, but it's like we'd have, this is the middle of the pandemic as well, so we had Zoom calls just to like, not specifically talk about story stuff, but just talk about the work, and you'd work stuff out if you had a particular thing you're thinking of. But that's kind of support. It's like everyone knew what everyone's working on, and like we're all like, you can do it, kind of thing. Yeah. And it just helps for like, deadlines and workflow that everyone was under.
Mm. Yeah, I'm curious too. So, kind of going back to, we talked a little bit about how you're borrowing characters, and Sarah mentioned Chuck, and I think one of the cool elements of this book and is the inclusion of a Sith adversary in the form of a character that Chuck Wendig introduced in the Aftermath trilogy, which you've mentioned as well. So I'm curious too, like, what does it look like for you, like maybe in your conversations with Chuck, and sort of like what sparked that idea to sort of borrow from that? What did that process look like for the character of Kiza, who is really interesting to see that continuation of that story?
Yeah, I think Acolytes to the Beyond, which is the group that she's from, I think was mentioned when I was given the kind of story idea, because the story idea was the Luke and Lando chasing Ochi, who is chasing Rey's parents, which is the line from The Rise of Skywalker that Lando says to Rey and all that. That was the idea, the kind of thing. And then they said, well, you could use there's the Acolytes to the Beyond you could use, or you could use this or this. And I was like, oh, Acolytes to the Beyond, that's from Aftermath. So I kind of went back to Aftermath and had a look. And of course, they just appear in those interludes, disconnected from the main storyline, but clearly reflecting like a larger, a larger side of the Star Wars universe. Because, and especially because Exegol is like Sith cultists, and this idea of relics that can hold power, and the Emperor himself like is killed, but he can force project himself into a clone body, which is kind of like a relic. It's like it's all kind of linked together. This kind of the more mystical and arcane side of Sith. So then I also needed Luke and Lando to have an adversary which had a storyline of its own, because the issue with the book is that they can't really meet Rey and her parents because that would like just explode continuity. But at the same time, they had to face some kind of danger or overcome some kind of adversary, because otherwise, what are they doing? It's just like they go from planet to planet and then Rey's parents die. It's like, well, that's a great book. So Luke, he had to have a foe great enough to fight, which is where Kaiser came in. So I was like, well, she's kind of interesting. Like, she's not a Sith. The Acolytes of the Beyond were not Sith. They were kind of cultists of their own. who wanted to be Sith, but like they wanted they wanted to get dark side powers, and they thought that relics and artifacts of the Sith could do that. So they collected lightsabers and they collected whatever, and it kind of didn't work. Except Kaiser got this mask, which was like, and then it transformed her. But yeah, it's like the thing with Star Wars is like the best things in Star Wars. Like when I was a kid, like the Bounty Hunters and Empire Strikes Back. I mean, this is a Boba Fett thing all over, isn't it? It's like they are the cool characters, and you got the action figures, and like Bosk has no lines, and he's in the Empire Strikes Back for 5 seconds, but like he's my favorite character. So, which is kind of what those interludes do. It's like, so if you could imagine the Kaiser action figure, it's like, wow, she's really cool. So then,
action figure.
Yeah, so would I.
The artwork was great.
Yeah, it's a poster as well. It's for the Barnes and Noble edition. And it's like, so yeah, it's a faux worthy enough, and it makes sense, and it's good because like it kind of, we see in the interludes in the Aftermath trilogy, Kaiser's a kind of origin story, and then obviously Shadow of the Sith is her kind of ending, but there's a period in the middle which, again, is a great Star Wars tradition. It's like, well, there's all this stuff that happens in the middle that we get hints at. So maybe she can even though we see her kind of come to her end in Shadow, she can come back in some form in a different story.
Yeah, I think that's the great thing about this book is that on the surface it could look like a solely a story about like Rey's parents and Rey and Ochi, but I think you're totally right in that like the Sith acolytes and like Luke's sort of adventure with that and Kiza's story is really the surprising kicker for a lot of people reading this, I'm sure, and I'm a huge I love Force stuff, like weird Force stuff, and so like the whole idea of like these masks and these artifacts is really interesting, and it's cool how Lando and Luke are coming at it from different angles in a way, like more Lando from the Ochi angle and Luke from the Sith angle, and then they sort of come together to a head, and that's where they find their commonality on the mission. I'd be curious, like with Luke being such a popular character, and obviously he's appeared a lot in, like The Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett, and we've gotten iterations of him in The Last Jedi, and like the sequel trilogy. How would you describe like where Luke is in his journey at this time? And did any of those like newer stories help to paint the way you wrote the character? Even some of the more recent stuff as you're going through edits and you're maybe fine tweaking a couple things.
I mean, Luke Skywalker, at this point, he's like the most powerful person in the galaxy, basically. But he knows it, which is important because he not only knows how powerful he is, he knows how powerful he could be, and he knows what will happen to that power if he misuses it. Like, he has first-hand experience. He's descended from, like, the most evil Sith there was, Darth Vader. So his self-awareness of his power is really key to his character at this point. Because otherwise, like, Luke the superhero is kind of boring. If he can just kind of click his fingers and do anything, like, you don't get a story from that. But his kind of awareness of his power really fits his character, especially because, like, by the time we get to the book, he's got his temple up and running, which we see being built in Book of Boba Fett. But this is like several years later, so it's up and running, and Ben's there and all this kind of stuff. So he's like recreating the Jedi Order to bring light back into the galaxy, aware that you can turn to the dark side actually quite easily, especially for someone like him who has such power available. The temptation to just use it, I mean, that's the whole point of the dark side. It's like giving into those kind of things. So, I mean, it's like that whole thing of, with great power comes great responsibility. He's always aware of that, and whatever decision he makes through the book, he's kind of weighing up what he can do and what he should do, which is actually interesting because when I was writing it, I found he was actually using the Force more than I had outlined, because he was getting to situations, and it's like, well, of course he'd use the Force at this point, or to get out of a situation, or to fix something, or stop someone, or whatever. So I was like, I said to my editor, it's like, well, when I sent the book in, it's like, he's actually a little bit more powerful than we kind of thought, because he would be. But again, it's like it's always this considered use of the Force. So he's kind of that thing, and then Lando is like kind of different again, because his world has kind of collapsed. We know him as that kind of, the gambler, the playboy, raconteur, kind of ladies' man type thing. And then when we see him in Rise of Skywalker, and he's like living in this machine thing as a hermit, watching Pisana. So the kidnap of his daughter is like clearly such an important turning point for him, completely changes his life. So what would he be like? By the time we get to the book, it's like 6 years. I think it's 6 years since his daughter's been kidnapped, and he obviously hasn't found her. And we know from the Rise of Skywalker that by that point he doesn't find her. So he's different as well. And this is the thing where Luke and Lando, like, they're two different characters anyway. And to kind of put them together as this kind of odd couple.
Yeah.
Because it's Lando who learns about Ochi and the Sith and goes to find Luke, because Luke is the only person he knows in the galaxy that can, like, even think about this kind of issue. So they kind of... It was really good to be able to kind of develop characters, because sometimes in a book you can't really do that, because, if it has to fit in between stuff, and obviously, Luke Skywalker is Luke Skywalker and Lando is Lando. But it's really good because, like you mentioned, we see Luke at the end of The Mandalorian, like when he just destroys all those, whatever they're called, the droid soldiers. Dark Troopers, yeah. So that's like Luke, the superhero, which is fine, because yes, he will do that sometimes when the situation calls for it. And in The Mandalorian, absolutely, he's going to like totally go ham, I think is the description you'd use. But then in Book of Boba Fett, he's training Grogu, or trying to, and it's like, peaceful, calm Jedi. This is the way, really the teacher and the wise Jedi. It's a completely different side of his character, but it's the same character. So I tried to, and it was important, because I was editing the book and then, seeing things like The Mandalorian, and especially Book of Boba Fett, that episode where we see the temple. It was kind of good because it informed me for the editing, but also that I was on the right track with the character, because that's who Luke is. He's a really interesting character, because of this kind of this depth of power that he's got. Yeah. But also, like, he could go dark.
There's a certain responsibility
he
has, because he's
It's interesting because it's not like he could go dark. It's not like he will actually just like change to the dark side. Obviously not. He's not actually not that kind of character. He's not like Ben Solo, for example. But he's got it's this kind of self-awareness, which is really interesting.
Mm-hmm. The book kind of talking about the Force, talking about the Sith and the cultists. The book kind of opens with a warning from a darker time, and I believe it's originally from the Revenge of the Sith novelization by Matthew Stover. Am I?
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
It really kind of sets an interesting tone for the book. Kind of what brought you to using this as an opener, and kind of pitching this as the beginning of the story?
So when I got the job, the first thing I did was reread Revenge of the Sith, which I feel is like a distinguished Star Wars authors do, because like Revenge of the Sith novelization is considered by many to be like the best Star Wars book ever written, which is interesting because like it's a novelization, it's not an original.
Right.
But and you read it and it's like, this is incredible. This is like, yeah. So I reread it and I was like, I wonder if I could like do something with something. And I actually, because I've got an ebook file, so I just did, I just searched for, I wonder if the word shadow appears anywhere in it. And I put it in, and then that comes up. It's the passage from whichever chapter it is. And I read it, and I was like, what? Oh my God, this is like the perfect... Because I already had this thing with Kaiser and the mask and the kind of she lives in this it's called the sepulchre. I can't even speak today. Whatever it's called in the book.
Yes.
Yeah. Which has got a droid furnace, so there's like all this kind of like the shadow. There's imagery of shadows and flames and things. So yeah, it was perfect. I couldn't believe it.
It's amazing. As I just said.
Well, and it's also like but it's one of those things. If you recognise it as being from Revenge of the Sith, great. If you don't, doesn't matter. It's still like a spooky kind of opener.
Exactly.
It's funny. It comes before the crawl as well. Because I also knew that I really wanted a crawl. Not all Star Wars books have them, but I was like, I wrote it pretending it was like episode 6.5 because I wanted that kind of epic cinematic adventure with explosions and starship chases and speeder bikes and like everything that you'd want in a big Star Wars movie. So I thought, okay, episode 6.5, this is the crawl, which I think I wrote quite early to kind of set the tone. But so I'm pleased that the epigraph.
Oh my gosh, we've had a whole conversation about this before, and I don't think we ever figured out. Yeah, I think it's epigraph.
Epitaph is something else.
Yeah. I don't know who we were speaking to, but yeah, it was like we're like 3 words, the whatever one, and the epi whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So as we start to wrap up the conversation, I know we've talked about a lot of different elements to this book. Again, like you have the Sith, the relationship with Luke and Lando, Rey, and kind of how she fits into the story with her parents, and filling in some of those gaps with the Rise of Skywalker. What do you ultimately hope is the takeaway for readers from this story, and what might you say to somebody who is trying to figure out maybe if this is a book they should pick up, or if this is something that you think would enrich their understanding of the Star Wars mythos?
It's going to sound a bit strange. I wrote it for every fan, and by that I mean, if you like the original trilogy, it's a Luke and Lando adventure, and there's actually not many Luke books in canon. And Luke and Lando, although they've got a kind of more of a history in comics, they don't really have any history in books much. If you're a fan of the sequel trilogy, well, it directly leads into the whole sequel trilogy because it deals with Rey's parents, and then more directly with the Rise of Skywalker because it's got Pride and other characters, and explains some of the kind of stuff that's hinted at. So really, it's like, it's a book for every Star Wars reader, because it's the thing. It's like this is episode 6.5. Let's pretend it's a big adventure with Luke Skywalker. If you're a fan who reads all the comics and knows the ins and outs, you'll get loads out of it. If you don't know anything except for you've watched the movies, then you'll enjoy it as like this is another Star Wars movie, which is great because like it's a milestone book because it's right in the middle of that period between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, which we haven't seen much of at all. There's like some comics, there's a book, Bloodlines, but it's a kind of like just this empty space, which let me do a book which has important kind of mythos moments, tent poles almost, which is great, and so you'll get a lot out of the book, I think. Like there's a panel, as I said, we're recording this at Star Wars Celebration. The Lucasfilm publishing panel and the editor Jen Heddle said that I delivered a manuscript that was 150,000 words, and everyone laughed, and I was like, or gasped maybe, which is interesting because then and like the final version is actually longer than that. So I can't wait to see the print edition. It's going to be like a telephone directory.
Oh yeah.
When we got the last Thrawn book by Timothy Zahn, we were like, oh my gosh, it's 550 pages. Like this is a big book, which was exciting to dive into. So I think fans will be able to kind of really sink their teeth into it and enjoy the epic scope of it, as well as kind of filling in some of those details and fun things to.
And I think that's it. It's the epic scope. It's like I wanted an epic adventure. What would I want? What would I want to read as a Star Wars fan? I want an epic adventure with Luke Skywalker and Lando Calrissian.
Two of my favorites from the original trilogy. You can't really much for us. You can't ask for much else. So yeah, Adam, thank you so much for taking your time out of your celebration and your day to join us. What do you have coming up that you'd like our listeners to know about besides Shadow of the Sith? And where can they find you online to see more of what you're doing?
Yeah, so my website is adamchristopher.me, which is a good domain. It sounds funny. It's the first time I've actually spoken it out loud. Yeah.
That was a domain name.
Yeah, dot me. Yeah.
Love it.
Because of course adamchristopher.com was taken. And I'm on Twitter as Ghostfinder, which I'm now stuck with because that's official canon now. Because there's the Ghostfinder fleet in the Aftermath books actually. Yeah. But yeah, I've got Star Wars coming up, and then we'll see what happens.
Awesome. Cannot wait for what's next.
Yep.
So hopefully everybody out there is enjoying Shadow of the Sith as the book is out by the point this interview's out. And once again, Adam, thank you for joining us on the podcast. We appreciate it.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, everyone, for listening to our interview with author Adam Christopher. Again, it was such a privilege to be able to interview him live in person at Star Wars Celebration of all places. So thank you, Adam, for your time. And thanks to Del Rey for making it all happen. We hope you enjoyed that interview and got a little something out of Adam's thought process for this book.
It was our first ever in-person interview that we've done together, but it definitely won't be our last interview on this podcast. So if you want to hear more from Friends of the Force, make sure you are following us on Twitter and Instagram for all the latest updates on the podcast. You can find Sarah and I on Twitter, Letterboxd, and Goodreads. Make sure wherever you're listening to the show to subscribe so all of our future episodes pop right into your podcast feed, and leave us a 5-star written review if you have a couple extra minutes in your day and if you enjoyed the episode, because it lets us know what we're doing right and it helps other folks find the show and join the discussion. We also have a Patreon where tiers start at just $1, and we are so grateful to all of our patrons. Thank you. Amy, Brian with an I, Brian with a Y, Carol, Cheryl, Clay, Danny, Davis, Dylan, Deborah, Donnie, Elegy, Huang, Jen, Knights of Ren, Levi, Leanne, Lucy, Luke, Randy, Rob, Saber Bouquet, Sky Talkers, Travis, and T. Yes, thank you all once again for supporting the show. Thank you all for listening, and until next time, may the Force be with you always. Happy Pride. Bye.